Happy Valentine's Day, Bruce.
Happy Valentine's Day. Hopefully I don't get the cold for you and pass it along to my wife, and then it'll be full circle.
Oh, no, it's the full flu, and you don't want any part of it. I'm on the other side of the house. I'm wearing a hazmat suit in the house. I mean, let's face it, a mom flu and a dad flu are very different.
How are they different?
Interesting.
This
is a hot take.
A mom is up making dinner the next day, and my family's like, you don't make dinner. A mom is up attempting to make dinner the next day. A dad's out for 3 to 5. This is fact.
This is anti-dad. Be careful.
You can't shatter the guy's impression of what Rich Eisen is like. His intestinal fortitude, his toughness, his character. Like, I mean, you're just basically telling these guys that there's no Santa Claus now.
Wow. I'm saying that dad is I'm saying that Rich is an all-time dad, but like this sign says best mom ever. And like you're so full of it, Brockman, because you know that I'm true. This is so true. Anti-dadism.
Seems like you're taking shots at my guy. I mean, I don't know what to do.
Oh,
here.
this is so lame. Are you kidding me? I'm not taking any shots.
He fancies himself as like the Jim Marshall of dads.
Rich was literally vomiting in between questions with Orlovsky yesterday.
He was in the middle of an interview. Luckily, they were on a one-shot, Bruce.
Does Orlovsky know this, that he drove a host?
He does not know this, actually.
He literally made a host sick.
I mean, he's a lovely guy. I don't think it was anything but that. It could have just been just the nonstop vomit yesterday, but that's a whole different conversation to be had. Hi, Bruce.
Hi, how are you?
You know, I'm just great. You heard our conversation with Kurt Warner, and you thought it was interesting what he had to say about the Bears quarterback position. Yeah,
it's a tricky spot because you have a really gifted athlete who's done some good things in Justin Fields. He's not old. He's just, I mean, and he's also had, as Kurt told you, he had a lot of transition around him, in terms of offensive coordinators and everything else. Now, if you sit there and say, all right, we believe that Caleb is special and we think he is as close to can't miss as we can get, then I do think it's a move he probably made. Because I don't think there's anything, again, and I'm not in the building in the Bears building, but I don't think there's anything they could say definitively as, oh, he is, he's a sure thing, because it's not like he's done what CJ just did, right, in Houston. He could be really good. He also could be like pretty good. And if he's just pretty good and he's up and down, and you're sitting there going, man, we passed up a chance to have a legit franchise quarterback. And look, maybe they feel that way about Drake May. I have no idea. It's almost like it feels like it's safer in an optics way to trade him and then hit the reset button. But I know that that's not a great answer either. It just really depends to me on what you feel like about these other quarterbacks coming out. And again, Caleb does some remarkable stuff on film. He's also, I don't know if he's picked up some bad habits because he's played behind a bad offensive line this year, because he's had a bad defense that, has been on the other side of the team for much of his career in college. I don't know what, he certainly had good skill guys around him. He just didn't have a good offensive line.
So if you're the GM, do you put all of your eggs into the Caleb Williams basket?
I would. I just think he is such a gifted passer. I think the things you have to feel really comfortable about, and this goes for anybody, I think you have to have a good offensive line in front of him. But I think Justin Fields can do some spectacular stuff when he has nothing around him. Ultimately, I think, that could be a 5-win team and with some spectacular highlights. The question is, can you be the franchise guy? And again, I'm not saying Justin can't be that guy. I mean, he's still really young. And by the way, he's had a bunch of different, coordinators over his college time, because he started at Georgia, then obviously went to Ohio State, did really well there. Again, and I'm not in the, it's like we're not in the meetings that are going to happen in Indianapolis. They're not in the meetings that are going to happen after the combine to see, okay, what do we really believe? Like, I know enough people inside USC that think really highly of Caleb. I think there's some circumstance around him that makes it, there's no such thing as a sure thing. There just isn't. I mean, I remember last year, not around this time, but maybe like a month after the draft, there was a lot of debate over how much these cognitive tests really mattered compared to what people saw on film from C.J. Stroud. I thought C.J. Stroud was the safer pick because he's a physically bigger guy than Bryce, but that's not what this discussion is now. It's just a different question, but that's why it's so interesting in the draft.
And C.J. Stroud has made it that much more difficult for every other quarterback coming out because he's made it look so easy. And, I mean, you can't compare. And then you see how these are the two guys that everyone's talking about. It depends on who the coach is, what the lines look like, but who do you expect to shine in this combine?
As the quarterbacks, Caleb's skill set is really impressive. Just as he's almost built like a running back in a lot of ways. He's really sturdy. He is very elusive and strong. I get why he's compared to physically sometimes to Patrick Mahomes. That's unfair to both of them because one guy is on track to be one of the greatest NFL players in the history of the sport. The other guy hasn't really done anything. He's just had a team that won 7 games at USC. But I think I could see that part, doing well. I'm interested to see what Jaden Daniels, how he is in the draft process, because he had an amazing year and he improved so much at UCLA from what the guy he was at Arizona State. Now, physically, he's not a big guy. I think people will see he's pretty wiry. He's gotten a lot bigger since he was, first got to Arizona State. But I think he's going to be an interesting evaluation. The other one I think will be interesting is J.J. McCarthy, because, J.J. is also a really gifted, I think similar to Daniels, where, he's a guy who might run in the 4.4s or at least low 4.5s. And unlike the other guys, he was not asked to do a ton as a passer. I'm not saying they didn't throw it at all, because he definitely throws well on the run. There's a lot of stuff that I think would impress people, and he's a winner. I mean, you see what he did, and I think some of the character stuff, I think for him, I think will play well in regards to maybe the statistics. And I don't think the NFL gets caught up in, this guy threw for 4,000 yards, whereas this guy threw for 2,500. I think they want to see certain things on film, and I think they'll see it. I think those are two really interesting evaluations. And the other one that to me is the biggest one, and Rich and I talked about him probably a month ago, was Michael Penix Jr., just because of there's just a lot I think the NFL is going to be sorting through, but he had a spectacular time at Washington those last 2 years.
It's Valentine's Day, Bruce, and thank you for joining us in studio. I don't know if I'm getting in the way of your planning for some kind of exciting, elaborate Valentine's Day ahead, but since I have to give Rich some kind of Valentine's Day, let's talk about some of the other Michigan guys that you expect to do well in the Combine. Yeah,
I think Chris Jenkins, his dad was a great player in the NFL. I mean, he was a guy Jim Harbaugh told me in July he thought he could be a top 10 pick. Chris Jenkins has gotten a lot bigger and stronger and more explosive since he first got to Ann Arbor. Really good player. I don't think he will, I don't think he will end up as high as that, but I think I could see him being a first round guy. Again, we wrote about this yesterday. I think there's 18 guys from Michigan, which is a combine record, invited to Indianapolis. And when I saw Harbaugh over the summer, he predicted that they would break Georgia's draft record and said that they would have, last year it was 15 that Georgia had. And people kind of snickered about that. It was like, Michigan, what? And then you started to see all these guys. Now, I don't think there's a ton of top, 25 kind of guys in this group, but I think it's a lot of guys who will be middle round players who are really good college players. And then there's a handful of them. It'll be fascinating to see how Roman Wilson, who was their top receiver, is not very big, but is very explosive, really quick. When he was at Michigan, the strength coaches told me he was testing off the charts there. And so we want to he did really well in Mobile at the Senior Bowl. I mean, I don't think he's a guy who's big enough to play himself into the first round, especially it's a really deep draft of receivers, but I think he's a guy that will be an interesting one to watch in Indianapolis. I think there's a bunch of other guys who are really good players, like Mike Sanders still is a smaller defensive back who is just a great college player. I mean, he's a really good athlete. He's just physically, I remember before the Ohio State game, I was with an NFL scout in warm-ups, and we talked about him. He was like, he's a really good college player. You just don't know if he's going to hold up. in the NFL, and certain people want bigger, and he's physically not a huge guy. But to me, I would not bet against that guy because he's one of the best players I've seen in college football on defense in like the last 5 years. And he stepped up. He made a ton of good plays. He's really athletic, and I just think there's something about guys who just have this kind of savvy and knack where they're always around the football, and he's got that. So I think he's one to keep an eye on wherever he ends up.
I feel like I'm broadcasting for an audience of one, so I'm going to keep talking about Michigan football. How good can they be? It seems like Harbaugh has just taken so many coaches along with him.
He has. I mean, look, Ben Herbert to me was the biggest loss. And if you were a Michigan fan, I know we had reported that when Harbaugh left that Herbert was expected to go, and people were like kind of incredulous because honestly, the role of the strength coach seems to be a lot more significant with a college team than it is in the NFL. Where in the NFL, you have some guys have their own trainers, and it's really more of a developmental aspect in college. I think losing him is significant. They replaced him with a protege of his, which I think is probably as close to that as you can get. I'm fascinated to see how Wink Martindale does. Longtime NFL guy, big reputation in the NFL, but now he's going to the college game. There's still some good pieces on the side of the ball defensively. They lost a ton on offense. Now Donovan Edwards is still there, but Colston Loveland, who's a really good tight end, is a borderline All-American kind of player. So you have some pieces to work with. What I wonder about is if you're a Michigan person, or if you're Rich Eisen, for instance, you sit there and go, okay, you can take a deep breath. We just won the national title. We won it 3 years in a row. If we win 8 games, we go 8-4. I know you don't want that, but it's like, I don't think you're going to be pulling your hair out after this past year because it was such a roller coaster ride. I mean, given all the guys, like I said, 18 guys are going to the combine. This team is very depleted. There's still some good players, but it's not like they have coming back what Ohio State has coming back. They haven't added, Ohio State in the portal added arguably the best defensive player in the country this year, who was at Alabama. People thought he was going to go to Georgia, and then Ohio State was able to win that recruiting battle. And, again, first time Sharon Moore, he has had coaching experience, but I think what you want to see is, do they play like what we're used to Michigan playing? Because I think that, again, if they can get to anything north of 8 wins, I think after last year, after all the guys have lost, and certainly after you lose Jim Harbaugh and the core, I mean, there's still a handful of guys who were on that coaching staff who will be there. I think that would be anything above that would be a positive sign.
Chip Kelly, why leave a head coaching position to go be the OC at Ohio State?
I think really the job he had at UCLA changed dramatically in the time he was there, the 6 years. And it really did right when NIL came in. I think for him, it was you were going to be constantly fighting with a short stick. They would lose recruits as it became more and more of a thing where NIL really turned into pay for play. And I think they really had a hard time reconciling, hey, are we going to have boosters involved in the process? And then I also think you have a guy who honestly would much rather coach football and call plays and try to develop players as opposed to go spend a lot of time out on the booster circuit with donors and trying to really rally for NIL. And I think that became increasingly harder, honestly, over time, because I think there was a lot of UCLA fans who are over Chip Kelly, a few years ago. So it was just more of a disconnect. I think it grew further than that. I know this past year they had a bowl game. His quarterback coach left to become the offensive coordinator at Oregon State. So Kelly jumped in to be the quarterback coach. And I think he was very happy with that and liked be able to be hands-on in the meeting with the players, where he was you're much more involved than you would be as a head coach. So when he interviewed for some NFL offensive coordinator jobs, I think that was appealing to him as opposed to some of the other stuff. And look, he's not alone in this, where there's a lot of college football coaches right now who are frustrated by all the other stuff that now is a part of the job now in terms of the job requirement. I don't see him wanting to be the carnival barker guy to rally to get money. I mean, he does not even on social media. So I think some of these things just really did not line up. And the fact when the Ohio State offensive coordinator job came open, I think it was very, compelling for him because his relationship with Ryan Day. I mean, he grew up a mile down the road from Ryan Day. He recruited Ryan Day to New Hampshire. Then Ryan Day broke in as a coach under him. And then Kelly brought him with him to Philadelphia and then to the 49ers. Their families are close. So I think it was probably a win-win. I don't think he would have left for probably any other college offensive coordinator job, but I think to go work with Ryan Day there where the resources they have, and I don't think he's going to have to be involved in some of the stuff he didn't want to be involved in. I think that probably seemed like a really good fit.
You have to wonder if some of these coaches just don't want to deal with college football anymore with the NIL rules.
No, I mean, I've heard from a bunch of them that like it gets to be really frustrating. I think it gets to be really frustrating because on one hand, there's the aspect of you are recruiting and then all of a sudden, once the conversation turned to money, and I've talked to guys on the UCLA staff about this within the last 2 weeks, and one of the assistants was like, yeah, whenever they would ask, I'm like, we have zilch. We have no money. So they're competing against teams that are, their NIL war chest is into the 8 figures, and UCLA's, from what I was told, was not even in the 7 figure. So that's an uphill battle. And the flip side of it also is there are some coaches also see some of the challenges that come from NIL in terms of what it can do to the locker room. It's not to say that players aren't deserving or that it shouldn't be going into some of this direction, but I think there's also some challenges that come with it. I think it's not insignificant that the team across town didn't even win it. UCLA won 8 games and beat USC pretty handily, and USC didn't even win that many, and they have 3 collectives and were much more involved on the NIL front. So it's not to say if you're all in on that, you're assured of everything's gonna be better. I think it gives you probably a better chance, but there's challenges that come with it too.
I'm all for these players getting paid and getting reimbursed, or if there's any other word to say it, for the time and effort that they put into it. I think you're 100% right about the division in the locker room. We've seen images of players pulling up in Lambos, and that's not exactly what people had in mind when they said, give them a shot to be paid for what they're doing. You mentioned UCLA. Deshaun Foster announced as the new head coach. I love that so much from my years covering him when he came straight out of Tustin and went right up the 405 to go to UCLA. And I'm wondering, how successful do you think he can be there?
So, it's going to be interesting to see. Like, everybody likes Deshaun, right? You've been around him he's just a good guy. He has a good way about him. He was a great player there. It wasn't just like they hired a guy who was a great player in the NFL, but like he was one of the best position coaches in the Pac-12. He developed really good players. I know from guys I've talked to on the staff said he's a disciplinarian. He knows how to solve problems. He had the pulse of the team. All those things are really good. I would not worry that, he's never been a coordinator, because he's going to hire somebody to call plays. I also think the fact that he was a great player there and is really well liked, not just by people inside the program, but by former players. Now it's the thing is, all the UCLA fans who are kind of over what they've had for the last 5-6 years, now they really need to step up and support the program in a big way. And it'll be interesting to see if they can ramp that up. I think he's going to probably keep a lot of the same assistants that Kelly had. And look, I think that because he's been there for a long time, he has a lot of familiarity. I know he left for the Raiders for like a couple of weeks, but I think given the circumstances, to me, this was probably about as good a hire. I think of all the people I heard were in the mix as serious candidates when this started, including Deshaun, I think this is probably as good a hire as they could have made.
How are you seeing the relationship of coaches to players change as college football progresses, from the Nick Sabans of the world, who were that paternal-like coach, who were full disciplinarians, to having some of these coaches that are younger and perhaps can communicate with these players perhaps more effectively?
Well, we've seen obviously in the NFL, a bunch of younger coaches have had a lot of success. Obviously, Sean McVay, really, really young. Doesn't mean that they're not, didn't grow up in the business, not really, savvy. I think what has changed in the last few years is college football has become way more transactional. And there's no way around that. And so it doesn't mean, just because somebody's young doesn't mean they can't be a real disciplinarian. And I think in a lot of ways, and I'll use the Foster example, like he's a guy who had a really good room that he coached, and I think he had commanded respect. And now it's like, to me, the job as being a college head coach has changed a lot in the last few years, especially if you don't have, like, certain programs have way more support than others. I'm not just talking about financial, I'm talking about the resources to hire a lot of other people. And I think what you have to see is, okay, it's one thing to be a great X and O's guy, but there's so much more that goes into the job of running a program now. And whether it's like across town, Lincoln Riley's a brilliant offensive mind, but there's, like right now they're trying to find that balance. They shook up the whole defensive staff because obviously it wasn't good enough. And I think it gets to be a part where it's like, okay, what's the identity of this program? What is our culture? And I think that starts with the head coach. It has to.
Let's quickly, we've got 1 minute left. Let's unpack this new college football deal with ESPN.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people initially thought it was going to be split because if you look at the NFL model, NFL, there's a bunch of big networks that have different investments in it and spread around. That's not what this one's going to be. Now, it's possible that ESPN ends up farming out a game or two to one of the other networks. In full disclosure, I work for one of the other networks at Fox. So we'll see how it goes. I mean, obviously for ESPN, college football has been a big part of its identity, whereas like some of the other networks, I think are way more invested into the NFL side of it.
6-year deal, $1.3 billion. It is crazy how much money college football brings in. It really is kind of insane, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, look, the ratings aren't what they are for like big NFL. The ratings are still really big compared to almost everything else.
Yep. In one last question, we've got 30 seconds to go here. Who's in best position for college football as we head into the fall?
In terms of team or
teams?
There's a lot of turnover. Alabama, new coach. Michigan, new coach. Ohio State, a lot of new stuff. Ohio State, honestly, is the way they've gone all in on NIL and the portal this offseason. They are the most intriguing team to see right now. New Big Ten, but Ryan Day adds his buddy to help run the offense or to run the offense. I think that's the team that everyone's going to be fascinated by.
Oh boy, Rich, are you okay out there? I know it's not what you want to hear on Valentine's Day, but
he's got a national championship from a couple weeks ago. He'll be fine.
But he'll be moving on to the next season so fast. Bruce, I really appreciate your time. This has been Bruce Feldman here from The Athletic and Fox right here on the Rich Eisen Show.
Catch the Rich Eisen Show every single day on the Roku channel, 12 to 3 Eastern for free.